So
Sorry.
it's close to 5:09, at least 9 minutes past the hour in whatever country you're in. So it's 9 past any hour. So we are waiting for a prayer from one of the Baha'i heroes that are present on the screen here. And anyone that wants to say a prayer or to chant a prayer, we can start our storytelling. Anyone.
Yeah. Oh, Deva. Oh, Deva. నన్ను నడిపించు నన్ను రక్షించు నా నుండి ఒక శోభాదీపికను ఒక తేజో నక్షత్రాన్ని నిర్మించు దేవా నన్ను నడిపించు నన్ను రక్షించు నా నుండి ఒక శోభాదీపికను ఒక తేజో నక్షత్రాన్ని నిర్మించు నీవు మహాశక్తియుతుడవు అధికార పరిపూర్ణుడవు నీవు మహాశక్తియుతుడవు అధికార పరిపూర్ణితుడవు.
Thank you. Thank you, Munir. So again, Susie and I, my co-pilot.
Good evening.
Allah Allah.
Director and producer. Director and producer.
What did he say, Violet? I didn't hear that.
He said director and producer.
Oh, wow. Munir has a great sense of humor, I tell you.
Yeah, we are heroes, so you are writing, Violet is writing the story screenplay.
Yes, you're right. You're very smart and very nice. Sorry? Okay, sorry. Listen, I really apologize for not being extremely original, but I'm just sort of fascinated by the life of Dr. Muhajir. So I hope you bear with me so I can sort of get into the story that is told by his wife, because there is in that book, I'm sure you probably have read it or you must know a lot more about it than I do, but the book is so thick, it's about like 500 pages, you know. There's 3 parts of the book that I'm just dealing with the very first part, when they both were a young Persian couple, he extremely active in Iran, and they made the decision to pioneer, right? And we started that story until we landed in close to the islands. And now I'm going to continue what happened as soon as they landed in those islands. And so that part goes till the passing of the guardian, and till he actually was named at the age of 34, a hand of the cause of God. And that part of their life, both were together and were young. And things did change later on. I mean, things happened, and you probably know about it, but if you don't, you'll find out soon enough. So that part is the pioneering in these islands in Indonesia. And then, of course, they had to move and a lot of things happened, and they moved. And for the next 20 years, he was traveling constantly. I don't know how much time he spent at home with his wife. I don't think he spent much time. If you read the second part of the book, which is very thick and details all the places that he went to inspire people about mass teaching and deepening Baha'is and talking to institutions, national assemblies and board members and all kinds of institutions in and out, and giving talks and firesides and inspiring their friends, non-stop. That life is basically what Baha'u'llah says we should be doing. I mean, nobody does that. I guess only hands of the coast do it. Very exceptional people. Is the one that the quotation that says, and teach unceasingly his cause. I don't think anybody has done unceasingly business than Mr. Muhajir. Maybe Martha Root, but Martha Root was not doing the same kinds of things that Dr. Muhajir was going after the masses everywhere, but he started in Indonesia. So that part is very difficult to do in Zoom because it's very thick. There's so much, and it's not, you don't get into intimate details about his life, except if you, because it's just reports that the Mrs. Muhajir got from all these institutions. She just collected all those reports and she built up 20 years of travels. So the interesting part is the beginning part and the end part. I mean, in my humble opinion. And so I'm going to be talking about the end part next time. Hopefully, if I get through this one. I don't know if I'm going to get through this one till 1959. No, I might not do because I'm going to go slow. So, and then is the last year of his life, 1979. When you read in the book, the last time he visited Ecuador, the last year he visited Brazil, the last year, and the kinds of things he says, and the last words he gave to these communities, and a lot of reports and anecdotes about his life and dreams he had that last year when he passed away, of course, in 79. Very young, of course. I don't think he was 60, but maybe 57 years old. So I'm just picking up where I left off when they landed in that boat, and that's what we're talking about. Of course, the islands of Mentawai. I don't know if I'm spelling it correctly or saying it correctly, but there were 4 islands, and they stayed in the Siberut Selatan Island. That's where they lived. And of course, he was really more interested in the native people, and they were all living outside of that town in all these hamlets, And of course, he went to visit them all. Now, so I pick up the story. If you have the book, of course, it will be page 149, so 45. So I'm going to go slow, and I hope you're not too disappointed, but I just read it and reread it. And to me, it's fantastic reading. And I can't summarize it because it'd be useless if I summarize it. You lose all its flavor. So you're going to have to be patient. Otherwise, you're not going to stay on screen. You're going to go. Now, with our few words of Indonesian, okay? They picked up few words of Indonesian. These Persian people left Iran. I don't think they spoke English. Maybe he did. She didn't. She was like maybe 20 years old. So with our few words of Indonesian, we tried to thank them for their kindness because they just arrived. It was then that we found the 2 men who were to become our translators the following months. One was, I think I may have read that. One was Eddie, who's a very pale and emaciated young man, a Protestant who had studied English for a few years at the mission school in Padang. And the other was named Kamaluddin. I think I said that. Yeah. Kamaluddin, who was called Ludin to everyone, a man of about 30, clad in a sarong with a traditional Indonesian black hat, who had studied the Quran and understood Arabic. The kind of details she talks about here, she's never going to talk about it later on in the book because she wasn't there with her husband anymore. She was alone. But now here she was with him and she remembered everything. She remembered that he had a black hat and he studied the Quran and understood Arabic. So she would go into details because she lived it and she suffered in the process. So 3 final blasts of the boat's siren heralded the departure of that boat that comes every 3 months. It would not return for at least another 3 months. So you go to places that are so strange and so difficult and so different, and it's like you feel like you've when you're pioneering, you go to a place, especially they went to a place with no return ticket. I mean, a lot of the stories, parts of the stories remind me of my parents when they went pioneering in Morocco. You know, they get one-way tickets, they get stuck. You know, you don't understand the culture, you don't know what's going on. It's like even us when we came to Zaire, we landed there and we thought we were just lost. We never go back, and it's like, oh my God, what's happening to us? And you get this culture shock, and you don't know how you're going to make it. I mean, you're supposedly detached because you're pioneering, but you can't help the reaction. Like you feel like that's it, you know, like I'm going to be buried here. So under the direction of the village chief, Abdullah, the Mentawais had paved the paths with small stones, only to lose them in the first storm. Mr. Mayor, who was Tuan Chamat, tried his best to persuade us to stay in his island. Once he was assured that we would stay, he had to decide what to do with us. Chamat was appointed by the government and disliked by the majority of the population. He occupied the lowest rank in the government system, which started at 2A and rose to 6C. The rank of Chamat, or assistant Wedana, was 2A. Being a physician, Rahmat was automatically entitled to the rank of 6B. I think I've read that last time. So, according to Chamat Abdullah, the other person he had known of such high rank was a long departed Dutch colonel, who of course had never actually needed or wanted to find accommodations in Muarasiberut. That's the city they were in. So Chamat was to prove a good and reliable friend to us in the years that we spent in Mentawai, and helped us through many a hardship. His tall tales was a source of relief and entertainment during many lonely days, and he tolerated Rahmat's teasing with good humor. Often when he mentioned that he had been offered the governorship of Sumatra, but had refused it, Rahmat, with a straight face, would encourage him to accept the position for the good of the people of Mentawai. On one occasion, Chamat ran out to our house with great excitement to inform us of the sighting of an enemy plane. No plane had ever passed over the Mentawai Islands. Yeah. Can you hear me? Can anybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
You can all hear me?
Yeah, yeah.
The only Munir can hear me.
Yeah, yeah, others also here.
We can hear
Muted.
you.
Oh, okay, fine.
We can all hear you.
Very good. Violeta was checking. All right. So he ran to their house to inform them that there was sighting of an enemy plane. No plane had ever passed over the Mentawai Islands. That one was sighted was proof of its hostility. So Rahmat assured Chamat that with his wisdom and bravery to lead us, we could face any onslaught. Chamat agreed and told us how he had hunted lions with the Dutch colonel and how he had saved him from the one lion's attack. We knew by this time that the jungles of the Mentawai Islands did not harbor lions, but still we did not question his claim. He left happy in the knowledge that the doctor would be available to tend to the wounded if the islands were attacked. So, as the months passed and we became more familiar with conditions in the village, we understood the nature of Chamat's dilemma at our first encounter. However, on that first day, I could not understand why he was not prepared to offer us hospitality in his home. What Chamat did was to gather the other government officials, 11 altogether, one of whom was the owner of the stall to which we had been led, to consult about our accommodations. So the only vacant place in the village was an abandoned building with 3 rooms, which had been the residence of the Dutch warden. It seemed a plausible solution. With Chamat in front and the whole village following, we went to inspect the proposed dwelling. We had to walk single file through the passage made in the tall wild grass, holding the hand of the person in front of us so that we would not slip. I still thank God for our ignorance on that day. Had I known what lived in the shrubbery, I would have preferred to stay where we were rather than risk being bitten by the snakes and the centipedes abounding in the grass and mud. The whole venture, however, proved futile. The house assigned to us had been built some 30 years before on wooden planks with walls of tree bark and a thatched roof. It had been abandoned to the ravages of nature for more than 10 years. The roof had gaping holes, the walls were rotten, and termites were feasting on the remaining wood. A few goats had occupied the doorless rooms, and chickens were nesting in the corners among the pieces of thatch that had fallen from the roof. Although Chamat assured us that the water snakes which had been flooded out of the brook in front of the house and were now slithering around us were completely harmless, I had no intention of finding out for myself. Huge rats were running about, some sitting on their hind legs and observing us with curiosity. Rahmat's attempts to calm me down by saying that we could just sweep a corner and wait till better accommodations was found did not have its usual effect. I preferred to go back to the shore and wait out the 3 months for the return of the BO, that's the boat. My Persian protestations were somehow understood by Chamat. The village council gathered under the banana leaves and after a while informed us that the village schoolmaster had generously agreed to give us temporary shelter in his house for a small remuneration. The congregation followed us to the schoolhouse on the other side of the village. It consisted of 2 small rooms and a smaller shed which served as the kitchen. The room facing the ocean had a window which caught the breeze and was quite pleasant. The back room stored bales of tobacco, which the schoolmasters bartered with the natives as a sideline business. Its only opening was the entrance door. This was offered to us for the 2 months that the school was in recess. The ceiling was low, and Rahmat had difficulty standing up. However, there were no rats visible, and the smell of tobacco drove them away. I thank God profusely for this great bounty. The whole village sighed with relief. It was now about 6 hours since our arrival. You guys, so this is 6 hours. Now, see how much detail she's giving in a 600-page book about just arriving. But this is the best time of her life, she says. It was now about 6 hours after our arrival. No, I already paid him. It was getting dark and the rain had become much stronger. The villagers had lost interest in our affairs and one by one had left the scene. The house had no bathroom facilities. Eddie explained that we should wrap ourselves in sarongs, collect rainwater in a pail, and take our bath in front of the house. This was what everyone else did. The schoolmaster's wife, a portly and kind middle-aged lady, took my hand and guided me through the tall grass over a slippery wooden plank to a brook within about 30 yards from the house. 2 planks were thrown over the muddy water, which abounded with water snakes and bullfrogs. To my amazement, she smilingly demonstrated its use as a toilet facility. Okay, that's called pioneering in the 1950s in Indonesia. Future, Night of Baha'u'llah, Hand of the Cause of God. A small kerosene lamp was lent to us. Chamat brought us a bowl of boiled rice and some dried fish, smothered in ground hot chilies, and bade us Sitemek, a kind elderly man, became a very good friend of ours in the ensuing years. He would order goods from Padang, then sell these to me at very inflated prices. However, his store was the only place with a battery-operated radio, so it became a haven for us. Once a week, he would turn on his radio in our honor and allow us to listen without charging us for his precious water battery. Although he tried his best to accommodate our needs, we had to make do with what we had. If we asked for soap, he would reply, I have no soap, but I have something else, matches. This was a regular feature of our trips to the store, and we were often offered soap when we needed salt and candles when we needed soap. Rahmat called him Si Lain, meaning Mr. Something Else. Si Temeh grinned toothlessly and offered green tea to Tuan Doctor. A few years later, after our departure, Rahmat returned to visit the island and found that Si Temeh had passed away. His wife lamented that Rahmat had not been there to tend to her husband and said, Si Temeh's illness was something, but the medication given to him was for something else. We often prayed for Si Temeh's soul, but Rahmat could not keep a straight face, remembering how the old man had kept his habit to his last breath. Chamat advised us that the only way to buy anything was to wait for the boat and order goods from Padang. The only problem with this suggestion was that the boat would not come for another 3 months, and with the usual postponements and delays, it would be about 10 months before we could meet our basic needs. The village council was convened again, and we were informed that some of the villagers were ready to lend us the necessary materials for a small monetary compensation. By that evening, 2 chairs, 2 plates, 2 tin cups, and a few cooking utensils were brought to us. Although most of them were chipped and broken, we were very grateful. Our landlady cheerfully took it upon herself to teach me how to cook on firewood, though it took her a while to realize that I could not cook at all. However, she persevered in teaching me how to collect firewood and how to make a wood stove with mud and stones, sheltering it with banana leaves. In the following years, I realized how helpful this skill was and what a debt of gratitude I owed that kind lady. Drinking water was another problem. We were told that in the months of the monsoon, we could collect water in pails for washing and cooking and drinking water in hollow bamboo sticks by leaning them against a tree trunk. However, when the long months of the dry season arrived with temperatures above 45 degrees Celsius, I had to walk to a spring about 2 miles away and carry water in a pail. Rahmat was already planning his first visits to the natives of Mentawai. Despite Chamat's efforts to convince him that these people were not worthy of a doctor, Rahmat prepared to leave in a few days. The only medication available in the village was the few pills Rahmat had brought with him. A small wooden box containing the village's medical supplies proved completely useless. A few bottles of penicillin had long passed their expiry dates, and many of the pills were mixed together and could not be identified. It took many months before the Ministry of Health could fill Rahmat's orders and send appropriate supplies to the Mentawai Islands. By that time, both of us had contracted the severest kind of tropical malaria. Every 2 days, we went through a sequence of chills and blinding fever, and extreme fatigue and weakness followed each attack. We were not much comforted by our landlady's story about a Dutch military man who had suffered from the same kind of malaria, had gone quiet mad, and had to be sent home in a straitjacket. By the time we obtained a supply of quinine tablets, the disease's grip on us was so strong that although it did not occur so frequently as in that first year, we suffered from it throughout our 5 years in the Mentawai Islands. 5 days after our arrival, 5 days now, accompanied by Ludin and as his translator, Rahmat set out in a small canoe rowed by 5 Mentawai men. This marked the culmination of many months of prayer and preparation to fulfill the wishes of the beloved guardian. At this time, my father was on pilgrimage, and the guardian was anxiously awaiting news of the opening of the Mentawai Islands to the faith. One day, he happily announced the receipt of a cable from the National Spiritual Assembly of India, which supervised the affairs of the faith in Indonesia, informing him of our arrival in the Mentawai Islands. He gave my father a cable to be sent from Turkey to Iran that another virgin territory had been opened on February 4, 1954. It was a long time, however, before we were informed that the guardian had announced our names to the Baha'i world as Knights of Baha'u'llah. Okay. So from his first encounter with indigenous people, I mean, that word will be coming up throughout all his life. Indigenous people. All over the world, the indigenous people. That's the people in the bush, Asia, Africa, South America. Rahmat established a systematic routine, the foundation of his mass teaching methods throughout his service to the faith. The Mentawais were simple people with primitive traditions based on animistic beliefs. They had great respect for their ancestors, but did not have formal rituals of worship. When someone died, the corpse was wrapped in banana leaves and bark and was lifted to the top of a tree growing on the riverbed. Every so often, the corpse was washed in the river and the remains rewrapped. When the bones were completely clean, the relatives of the deceased took them to the home and hung them from the rafters of the ceiling. On one of our first visits to a hut, I was hit on the head by one of these hanging bones. It was not until months later that I realized that the bones were not ornaments, but the remains of the host's father. Rahmat's trips upriver took a few days. To reach the farthest hamlets, he had to walk through thick jungle, sometimes for days on end. No cars, nothing. Jungle, thick, on foot, for days. He and his Mentawi guys carried machetes to cut a passage through the tree branches and undergrowth. They had to repeat this every time they passed the same way, as the shrubbery grew so fast that within a few days it covered the path they had cleared. On his first trip, Rahmat was gone for about 2 weeks. She's all alone now in the house for 2 weeks. I had to start life in the small village of Muarasiberut on my own. We had brought with us a book from which to learn Indonesian, and I started to study the language. For the first time, I understood the importance of Baha'u'llah's teaching about universal language. Learning Indonesian was not very difficult, but since I had nothing else to do, I had been warned by the Sumatran villagers not to leave our room when Rahmat was away, as I might be attacked by the Mentawis who had not seen a white woman before. So although Shamat emphasized that he would severely punish anyone who dared cut off my head, I felt it more prudent to heed the advice of the villagers and not venture out of the room unless absolutely necessary. Such notions about the natives were, of course, completely erroneous. As we became more familiar with them, we found the Mentawais to be the most friendly, the gentle people we had ever known. In the early days, however, I locked the door of the little room and studied Indonesian from sunrise to sunset. In a few months, I had no trouble with the language and could comfortably communicate with the villagers. I felt a great deal less lonely and helpless. Time had no meaning anymore. We had no calendar, and our only timepiece was a small delicate wristwatch given to me as a wedding gift, stopped working after a few days. I never discovered the cause of his demise, although Chamat suggested that it could have been the extreme heat. We started fasting on a day that we thought was March 2nd. I have never been so happy at the approach of the fasting period as I was then. I did not have to think about food, which was not available anyway. We opened our fast with boiled rice and the juice of lemons, which grew wildly on the island, and Rahmat, while traveling, ate coconuts and bananas. It was only by accident that we realized we had continued fasting for 22 days. My despair on missing the Nowruz feast was so funny to Rahmat that I decided it was better to forget the whole thing. He couldn't understand what I would have done differently on Nowruz, as we said the same prayers and ate the same meal every day. In the first months of his travels, Rahmat tried to study the customs and the habits of the Mentawis and learn the language. Although he told them about the faith through Luden, he did not expect them to become Baha'is. He wanted them to get to know and trust him. First, he also wanted to talk to them directly in their own language. He tried to help them with the limited amount of medical supplies he had, visiting the villages several times within a few months. Skin diseases, malaria, tuberculosis, and many other ailments were rampant. Shamans were the only ones who tended the sick. On one of these frequent trips in the middle of 1954, which is the same year they arrived, he was going to Sipai Pajet, the farthest village in Siberut. One of the men rowing the canoe was an elder of that village by the name of Amata Sinanga. Amata Sinanga. During the week that they spent traveling, Rahmat talked to him in the Mentawai language, which he had mastered by this time, telling him that Baha'u'llah and his teachings. Amata Sinanga explained that the Mentawai natives never accepted anything unless it was done collectively and with the approval of the village elders. So on arrival in Sipai Pajet, Amata Sinanga called the meeting of the elders and asked Rahmat to talk to them about the faith. After a few hours, they took a vote, and all agreed that what they had heard was good. Amata Sinanga declared that all of them had decided to be Baha'is. See, there they vote. All of them, and they accept at once. These 25 elders formed the nucleus of a community of thousands who were to accept the faith in those islands. Amata Sinanga was the first Baha'i of the Mentawai Islands, and Sipai Pajet, the first Baha'i village. See, the teaching in those parts of the world, it's not the same as teaching in, New York, London, Chicago, Paris. It's another world. Another world. But that's what the Guardian wanted people to go to these virgin territories and just teach and go for the indigenous people. They didn't have the benefits of Western civilization. So Chamat and his helpers, meanwhile, were busy repairing the former warden's house for our occupation. After about 4 months, the council proudly asked us to inspect their handiwork. The school had already started and as had the dry season, and life in our small room with the growing bales of tobacco and bundles of banana and coconut had become intolerable. By the mercy of God, the 40 or so children at the school tried to keep the noise to a minimum until the 2 intruders could vacate the premises. Although we were paying for the room, the schoolmaster was also anxious to get rid of us as our occupation of his trading office hampered his barter business. One room of the old building had been repaired, despite lack of materials. The council had patched the holes as best as they could. Old and yellowed Dutch newspapers were used as wallpaper. The paste, a mixture of sago flour and water, seeped through the thin newsprint and left light brown patches. For a while, just looking at the room gave us a sensation of dizziness, not unlike seasickness. However, we had no choice. We thanked the village council for all the trouble to which they had gone and moved our suitcases to our new abode. We lived there for more than 4 years in that room, and I gradually became well-versed in all the words and pictures of our wallpaper. I could quote whole paragraphs without knowing the meaning of a single word. The holes in the ceiling were merely covered by the paper, and with the first monsoon rains, they reappeared and remained for the duration of our stay. During the torrential tropical rains, which were practically continuous, it was much safer and more convenient for us to stand outside in the open. After each rainfall, we swept out the water and waited for the next downpour. There was no fear of damage to our belongings. We simply did not have any, except the second-hand stuff which had been given to us on our arrival. The most exciting event connected with the room happened a few weeks after our move. I could hear loud thumping noises from the attic, which could not be attributed merely to rats. My complaints were ignored for a while, but after I flatly refused to spend one more night under the gaping hole, horrified at the prospect of some creature falling on me, Rahmat approached Chamat, who sent 2 Mentawai men to investigate the alleged noise. After a vigorous chase around the attic, they climbed down carrying a live 3-foot-long lizard, which they promptly roasted over a fire in front of our room, making quite a feast of it. Seeing the creature consumed by them, and Rahmat's sworn statement that this was the only culprit, gave me considerable peace of mind and made our single room feel a little more like home. We settled into a routine and started planning our work in the islands. Rahmat's trips, only a few days long at first, became more extended as he tried to reach more villages, keeping him away for up to 40 days, teaching the faith and tending to the physical ills of the natives. 40 days alone in the house. His visits brought joy to the people. His love for them was so great and so obvious that they immediately felt and responded to it. Amata Sinanga related that when the doctor was even approached their village, people felt it and their health improved. The Metawais lived in widely separated villages. Now, I mean, you must have seen the book, but if you haven't seen it anyway, this is the happy couple from the Mentawai Islands. This is Monsieur et Madame. Voilà. Mentawai Island. This is a happy Mentawai couple. So, anyway. So, as I was saying, the Mentawais lived in widely separated villages in small clannish groups. Each group had claim to a few coconut and banana trees and did not intrude on the property of others. Their long houses were raised wooden platforms with thatched roofs, but no walls. The smoke from damp lighted grass could not drive away the bugs and mosquitoes. At night, the only light came from a little wick floating in coconut oil. A rag dipped in coconut oil and wrapped around a bamboo stick served as a torch when one had to walk in the pitch dark of the jungle. Their chickens and pigs were housed under the platform and the extended family lived above them. The Mentawais were monogamous and their marriage rituals very simple. Gifts were exchanged between the two families and the groom moved to the bride's house. Children were taken care of collectively by all members of the clan. There was strict equality of labor and social status between men and women, and they shared all chores, including cooking, child rearing, rowing, and fishing. The Mentawais of Siberut did not consume alcohol. Their main refreshment was a drink made from coconut juice, bananas, and cane sugar. They did not eat chilies, and the only seasoning they used was seawater salt. Meals were eaten with most of the group gathered together. Rahmat often shared their meals and never refused anything. Only once did he decline to eat a special delicacy offered to him. It consisted of live, large red ants cultivated in special hollow bamboos under the damp earth. If the ant had been cooked, he would have eaten them without hesitation, but they were uncooked. The acceptance of the faith by the 25 council elders of Sipai Pajet paved the way for the rest of the villages. Hearing about the faith and Rahmat's kindness, the other villagers sought his advice and treated him as their brother. They loved him dearly and called him Si Lotoro, Mr. Doctor. Rahmat's first act as a physician was to examine methodically every member of each village group and make medical charts for them. The most visible and prevalent of their ailments, besides malaria, was a skin disease called framboisia. A bleeding wound which ate into their flesh, was very contagious and caused deformity of the limbs. Rahmat had to wait for months before the required medicine could be sent from Padang. After months of experiment, he found out that framboisia could be treated with penicillin injections. Rahmat started a systematic program of treatment which achieved great results. The disease was completely eradicated, leaving only scars as a reminder of the hideous ulcers which the islanders had suffered for generations. A rare viral disease called the Penjakit Babi, pig's disease, indiscriminately affected people of all ages on the islands. It had similar symptoms to mumps, attacking the glands of the ears and the neck and causing a very painful swelling which gradually blocked the throat. It was invariably fatal. During one of Rahmat's long absences, I noticed a small swelling below my jaw, which, unaware of Penjabit Babi, I thought to be a tooth infection. As the swelling rapidly grew and all the cold and hot compresses did not help, I asked for for aid from Jonja Wali Negri, Mrs. Assistant Chamat, an old lady who had no schooling at all and who had been the village midwife before Rahmat's arrival. She immediately quarantined me in our room, painted my neck with blue ink, and covered it with a very hot poultice made of boiling rice. She advised me that I should pray to whoever I believed in, and then she left. I did not see her again for a long time. The hot poultice burned my skin, my thin, swollen skin, and blisters appeared over my neck and face. In addition to saying prayers, I took all the antibiotics available in the house and prepared penicillin injections, which I asked passing villagers to administer on the spot to which I pointed. Nothing helped. Then massive doses of antibiotics, lack of food, regular bouts of malaria, and the severe pain of the glands had made me so weak that I could only sit on the wooden plank that served as our bed and pray to Baha'u'llah to come to my rescue. Now, of course, we all know that all pioneers don't go through this, but they went through this. That's their story. Rahmat could not be contacted, as I had no idea which direction he had taken. Even if I had, no one would approach the house whom I could ask for help to find him. At last, some days later, the old midwife came to the door and advised me to pay some of the villagers to go look for my husband. I gratefully accepted her suggestion and paid the required amount. The same night Rahmat arrived, he had been in Sipai Pajet when he suddenly had felt that he should return. It had taken him about 10 days to reach home. 10 days to reach home. On our arrival, he was very surprised to notice the strange glances of the people. Finally, Ludin had told him that the villagers believed his wife was on the verge of death. Although Rahmat's presence was a great mental support, the disease continued to get worse. There was no way to have tests. Rahmat said prayers continuously, and I took the antibiotics. Another week passed before we suddenly noticed that the swelling was down and the fever was dropping. It was nearly a month before I was able to leave the room and take a short walk, assisted by Rahmat. We had a small flashlight with a very weak battery, which we had to use sparingly. While we were walking, Rahmat suddenly stopped and told me not to move. A deadly poisonous snake, a few meters long with black and white markings, wound its way under our feet. It seemed an eternity before the snake disappeared into the shrubbery. Now it was Rahmat's turn to collapse. The thought of having to watch his wife die from snake bite and not being able to do anything about it was too much for him. News of my recovery and my escape from the deadly snake spread around the village. Everyone considered it a miracle performed by Si Lotoro. His prestige among the local population increased enormously, and people started to come to him instead of the old midwife. As far as I know, however, no one else afflicted with Pick's disease was ever cured with antibiotics, and it persisted as a fatal illness for as long as we remained in Sibirut. The old midwife started to visit me regularly, and although she was a staunch Muslim, asked me about the faith. Rahmat treated her as a colleague and with loving patience taught her a more hygienic way to deliver babies. After we had left the islands, she called the Baha'i school teacher to her deathbed, confessed her belief in Baha'u'llah, and asked him to tell Rahmat. I relate these stories in detail as a reminder that Baha'u'llah always protects those who arise to serve in his path, no matter how insignificant the service. It is my belief that Baha'u'llah's love for Rahmat protected me from any serious illness. If I had needed an operation, even for something like appendicitis, I surely would have died. For a doctor to have to stand by helplessly and watch his wife die would have been an agonizing experience. I never even thought about what I would do if Rahmat were to fall seriously ill. Two local customs gave us great concern because of the effects on the natives' health. Tattooing began in childhood and continued till the mid-20s. Beautiful, intricate patterns covered almost the entire body and varied for each individual with distinctive features for each Mentawai tribe. The tattoos, however, often brought about painful infection and severe fever, and the ministrations of the shaman were not always helpful. Rahmat did not try to prevent them from continuing this cultural tradition, but rather taught them to sterilize their needles. This lessened infection to a great degree. Antibiotics took care of those who still became infected. Welcome to Paul and welcome to Alexa. Nice to see you. And welcome to Moro. More gems from across the oceans, from Haiti all the way down to Norway. Sharpening the front teeth by filing them with a piece of iron was also considered a thing of beauty by the natives. However, this practice often caused them to lose their teeth at an early age. As this custom was definitely harmful to their health, Rahmat insisted that it stop. He introduced dental hygiene by making toothbrushes out of coconut husks and taught them how to brush their teeth using salt for toothpaste. For months, he used the same method himself until the Mentawais became accustomed to it. He thanked God that in later years, he did not have to extract teeth as much as he had done in those early days. Being the only physician, he had to perform the duties of a dentist without any kind of anesthetic, which made it almost as painful for him as for the poor patients. Malaria was systematically eradicated by the spraying of the marshes and distribution of quinine tablets. Rahmat's revolutionary achievements were unique in Indonesia and became a model for social and environmental development work in that country. Okay. Now, just in parentheses, I got to see the upcoming book of Mr. Moro Baruch. We should all be looking for it and get advertised. And I saw a nice picture of the young couple walking the streets of Haiti when they were in the 20s. They remind me of our youth, and it was such a beautiful picture. Must need to be framed. And Paul was smiling, great smile. I just love it. Really enjoyed it. By the time a few months had passed, our life before Mentawai faded to a distant existence of no significance in our present environment. The bio, which is that boat, finally brought us some goods from Pading. As there was no electricity and no cooling facility, we could only order dry goods, and these in small quantities. Humidity was so strong that even rice would mold after a few weeks. Little by little, we learned to survive on bananas, rice, and fish. Although fish was the staple food of the expatriates, it was not available every day. It took me about a year before I could eat dry chilled fish, the smell of which hung heavily around the village. My friend, the midwife, taught me how to distinguish between kangkung, an edible wild vegetable which grew everywhere, and other poisonous plants. Kangkung, boiled in coconut milk and chili, became and remained one of our favorite foods. Years after leaving Indonesia while visiting Holland for a conference, Rahmat and I searched the whole afternoon for an Indonesian restaurant and ordered rice and kangkung to the great bemusement of the owner. Another source of greens was the leaves of the sago plant, which had to be boiled and strained several times before its bitter taste was lessened. I gradually mastered the cooking tricks of our Sumatran neighbors and could get by with whatever was available at a given time. Rahmat had started training the Mentawais in social matters while tending to their physical health. He taught them to value their goods and not barter them for tobacco. The Baha'is in the village knew that we would only exchange useful materials such as soap, clothing, and household items for their goods. As they had no idea how to use soap, Rahmat spent many hours teaching the villagers how to bathe and wash their clothes. He waded into the streams and rivers, washing himself and his clothing, encouraging them to imitate his methods. After a while, the natives loved the aroma of Lux soap so much that they would rub it on their skin as a perfume. The natives had no clothing as such in their natural habitat, only a narrow loincloth made of soft tree bark. When they visited the village of Muarasiberut, the man wore short pants and the woman wrapped an apron made of banana leaves around their waist. Rahmat never forced them to wear conventional Western clothes. He believed that the native customs of Baha'is should not be tampered with as long as they were not against the laws of Baha'u'llah. The new method of barter introduced by Rahmat while enraging the expatriates was of great benefit to the natives. They started demanding food, clothing, soap, and other materials in exchange for their bananas and copra. They no longer accepted the cheap tobacco which had been given to them for generations and said that Silotoro, Rahmat, had advised them to ask for the best of everything. Although Rahmat preferred them not to smoke at all, he knew he could not stop them. The cheap tobacco was so foul that it virtually guaranteed an early death for the natives, many of whom were already afflicted with tuberculosis. In the years that we spent in Mentawai, Rahmat used his authority as a government physician to make smoking below the age of 18 illegal. Although this could not be strictly enforced, many Mentawai parents did stop their children from smoking. The Mentawais learned from Rahmat that although they were Baha'is, they could not expect to receive free gifts from us and should contribute to their own village fund. They understood this principle and accepted it without hesitation. A few years later, when the Catholic Church opened a mission in Siberut and offered free clothing and tobacco in exchange for attendance at Mass, many of the Baha'is were able to resist this temptation. In this new environment, the natives started bringing us chickens and fruit from their villages. Although the bananas rotted and the coconuts were returned to them for some chore that Rahmat invented, he always bought everything they bought so that they would not be tempted to exchange their goods for tobacco. On Rahmat's advice, I started a chicken farm which kept me occupied on those days I had to spend alone. This occupation did not actually help our food situation, as I absolutely refused to slaughter any of the chickens and left the eggs to hatch. Only at such times when I was delirious with malaria was Rahmat able to sacrifice one of them to feed us. I remember on one occasion, Amata Sinanga, the first Baha'i, sent us a large white rooster. His son told me that his father, as a good Baha'i, did not want to give a free gift, and he was sure that Silotoro's wife, also a good Baha'i, would send him 3 bars of soap instead of 2. He received his 3 bars only through Rahmat's intervention, as I believed in keeping to the barter rate and did not like bargaining. Rahmat gradually taught the natives the value of money and encouraged them, while keeping the barter system in their villages, to sell their goods to the Sumatrans for money. They brought to an end years of exploitation of the natives of the Mentawai Islands by the expatriates. Our only contact with the outside world was when the boat arrived every 6 months. Its appearance, always unannounced, was received with great joy and generated new life in the village. Shouts of Kapal Tiba, the boat has arrived, rang from every home. The village Mina birds, ours included, had learned these words and shouted them every day from their cages. As the biu appeared on the horizon, people would flock to their boats, loading them with bananas, copra, dry fish, and coconuts, and row out to exchange them for rice, salt, matches, candles, kerosene, and other goods. We waited at the door of our room daytime or midnight, scorching heat or pouring rain, for the ship's orderly to bring the mail. No one else received any letters, and the few government communications were easily distinguishable in their brown paper wrapping. Sacks of mail, their number depending on the amount of letters we received, would be brought to our dwelling, and the contents dumped in our room. We sat for hours sorting through the letters and occasional magazines by their dates, which would range for over 6 months. We awaited our mail with special anticipation, as it often contained messages from the Guardian. Whenever there was a communication from the Holy Land, our spirits soared, hardships were forgotten, and homesickness seemed trivial. Often pilgrims wrote to tell us that the Guardian had made inquiries about us and had praised Rahmat for his services. On one occasion, we found a box containing 1,000 calcium tablets in the mail bag. My father's note said that these were sent by the guardian for me, with instruction that I take them every day. After the passing of the beloved guardian, Amatul Bahar Khanum told me the story behind this gift. A Persian pilgrim had been asked by the guardian about us, and she had mentioned that I had written to my parents that for some unknown reason my teeth were chipping. When they were alone, the guardian had told Amatul Baha that the reason was lack of calcium, and had asked her to send one box of her own calcium pills to my father so he could forward it to me. I took the pills regularly, following the instructions of the guardian, and to this day have had very few problems with my teeth. This is just one example of the way in which the love of the guardian surrounded and sustained us during all the years of pioneering in the Mentawai Islands. As the number of Baha'is grew, Rahmat spent more time with them in the villages. He taught them the faith in a simple language that they could understand and commit to memory, and taught their children Baha'i songs which he composed in Mentawai and Indonesian. He taught them prayers in Arabic and Persian, as none had yet been translated in their own language. Many children learned the prayers by imitating Rahmat's style of chanting. By the middle of 1955, a year later, there were 400 Baha'is on the island of Siberut, Selatan. There was 0 when he came. In one of his reports to the NSA of India about our work in the Mentawai Islands, Rahmat stated that the natives, though declaring their belief in Baha'u'llah, knew very little about the faith. And since they had no concept of God, much time and patience was needed for them before they could grasp the significance of the religion they had accepted. The news of these enrollments had been conveyed by the guardian by the NSA. Years later, we found out that he had announced this as a major victory to the Baha'i world. Following Rahmat's report, my father had received a letter from Dr. Hakim, written on behalf of the beloved guardian, asking him to assure Dr. Muhajir and his wife that the guardian prays for them and their service to the faith. The outstanding services that he and his wife have rendered have brought much joy to the guardian's heart. The letter, dated 18 July 1955, was accompanied by a cable dated 20 March 1955, sent by the guardian in answer to our cable, supplicating his prayers. His cable read, "Loving remembrance shrines." Receipt of this communication was welcome confirmation that Rahmat was following the right path in teaching and enrolling new believers. So in thanksgiving, he composed a song in Indonesian in praise of Baha'u'llah and taught it to all the children. Now, I'm not going to read you the song, but the English is, in English is, "Come, let us all supplicate prayers from Baha'u'llah, the all-powerful. We're all Baha'is everywhere, white and black, all are the same, with the same voice. We all sing, Allah Pa, Allah Pa. Oneness of mankind is what Baha'is cherish, brotherhood in peace, Allah Pa, Allah Pa." That's the content of that song. After a few months, not only the children, but also men and women in all the villages had memorized the song. The number of Baha'is was rapidly increasing, and by 1956, 2 years later, a year later, had reached more than 1,000. This was announced to the Baha'is, the Baha'i world, in the Guardian's message of April 1957. I quote the message. "A special tribute I feel should be paid to the heroic band of pioneers, and particularly to the company of the Knights of Baha'u'llah, who, as a result of their indomitable spirit, courage, and steadfastness and self-abnegation, have achieved in the course of 4 brief years in so many of the virgin territories newly open to the faith, a measure of success far extending the most sanguine expectations. To Uganda, open on the eve of the global crusade, where the number of the avowed adherents of the faith has now passed the 1100 mark, must be added the Mentawai Islands, where adult Baha'is now number over 1100. Malaria had seriously sapped Rahmat's strength, but he continued to trek through jungles, wade in marshes, and travel by canoe on the rivers and ocean through searing heat and torrential rain. I was often left behind. We would have had to travel in separate canoes and did not consider worth the risk, despite Shamat's assurances that he would hold the oarsman responsible if anything happened to me. Rahmat always returned from his travels exhausted, his clothes soaked in blood from the bites of leeches which still clung to his body. He dismissed my worries and said that this was God's providence, as the bloodletting prevented him from having high blood pressure. The Mentawi people, young or old, whether Baha'is or not, loved and respected Rahmat. They were so attached to him that they would follow him anywhere and do whatever he asked of them. Now, he wanted to establish schools for the children to remote areas. In classes that he organized in the villages, children and adults learned the alphabet and to write words and simple sentences in Mentawi and Indonesian. The 10-year crusade called for translation of Baha'i literature material into Mentawi, which up till then had been a spoken language. With Ludin's help, we were able to translate the leaflet Baha'i Message into Mentawi, called Utunuman Baga Baha'i, became the first ever publication in the Mentawi language. Now, you will see the theme of children's classes extremely strong in 20 years, the next 20 years of Dr. Muhajir's life. Because he believed that when you teach, you worry about the next generation. He was not counting on the current generation he was teaching, he was planting for the next one. Our schools had to be directed in Indonesian, therefore we had to wait until the faith had progressed sufficiently in Indonesia for Baha'i teachers to come from there and live in the Mentawai Islands. The first step, however, was the construction of schoolhouses. Rahmat visited 3 of the most deep-end villages, Sipai Pajet, Simatalu Ulu, and Simatalu Saibi, and gathered the elders and consulted with them how to achieve this goal. The suggested solution was to move the whole village to a better and larger site and build new houses, which would include the Hazrat al-Quds and the schoolhouse. Rahmat wholeheartedly agreed with this project, and using the tablet of Abdul Baha to the local assemblies of Bombay as a guide, planned whole new villages for them. In this tablet, the master gave instructions regarding the shape of the Baha'i cemeteries, which should in outward appearance resemble a palace. He wrote that the 4 large avenues in the shape of a cross should be constructed in the middle of the land with a pool of water in the middle of the cross. Each grave should have a flower bed 1 yard wide around it, and trees should be planted all over the land. The 3 villages were built in this fashion on land adjoining their old settlements. The villagers supplied the wood and labor. Rahmat gave them the necessary tools for the work. In 3 months' time, the new villages were ready for occupation, each with the schoolhouse and the Baha'i center. The move to the new sites was made with great ceremony and festivity. The old dwellings were kept to house the livestock. The greatest achievement of this move was the establishment of a Baha'i cemetery in the old land. The Mentawais Baha'is show their true allegiance to the faith by agreeing to bury their dead according to Baha'i laws. For a while, Rahmat presided over the burials, showed them how to wash and shroud the remains and how to make wooden caskets. In later years, the school teachers undertook this duty. All those villages which were not Baha'is had to follow suit, as the government had accepted Rahmat's recommendation and banned the practice of leaving dead bodies in trees. Rahmat showed his respect for Mentawai customs by his participation in their pre-burial ceremonies. The body would be placed in a sitting position surrounded with banana leaves and wild orchids, his face painted black and white as all the villagers paid their respect by touching the face of the deceased. The village shaman, called the Sikerei or the seer, in full regalia of banana leaves and feathers, his face painted red, white and black, danced and sang while another man played a mouth xylophone. Rahmat, who by now was accepted by Sikerei as an equal, put feathers in his hair and allowed them to paint his face. He participated in the chanting and dancing and touched the face of the dead person. This respectful attitude toward their traditions and customs made the natives so happy that they easily agreed to the burial of their dead according to Baha'i law. Rahmat's willingness to participate in the traditional ceremonies and celebrations of indigenous people was one of his outstanding characteristics and one reason for his success in dealing with native peoples throughout his travels. He loved and encouraged local traditions, believing them to be 1,000-fold better than the customs prevalent in the so-called civilized world. Unless a custom contradicted the Baha'i teachings, he would accept it, appreciate it, and share in it with the people he was teaching. In the middle of 1955, a year and a half later into the pioneering, we had to make a trip to Jakarta on the instructions of the Guardian. Despite his many cables to expedite the purchase of the Hazrat al-Quds in Jakarta, the friends had not been able to find a suitable place, and the Guardian had instructed Rahmat to assist in this project. This was the first time that we had left the Mentawai Islands for any length of time. Rahmat was determined to complete the purchase as soon as possible and return to his pioneering post. The task was accomplished in a few days. A cable was sent to the Guardian, and we left Jakarta at the first opportunity. On our return, we were informed that the Catholics excuse me. On our return, we were informed that the Catholic Church was in the process of establishing a mission in Muarasiberut, where they lived, right, in that town, in that major island. Although Protestant missionaries had arrived in the southern Mentawai Islands of Sipora and Pare in 1901, and Christianity had flourished there, the Catholic Church focused its attention on Siberut after hearing about the great number of Baha'is on that island. They considered opposition to the Protestant Church futile, but regarded the Baha'i work as insignificant and dismissed the idea of a Persian doctor as a religious teacher. We enjoyed a very cordial relationship with the Protestant pastor, Pastor Clapert, and his wife. They were German missionaries who had done very good work among the Mentawais of Sirpora. They once visited us for a few days, and the pastor traveled to some Baha'i villages with Rahmat. In 1968, a Persian Baha'i friend told me that he had asked for a German girl who was not a Baha'i to marry him. She had consulted her uncle, the Pastor Clapert, but immediately agreed to the marriage and told her that if her young man was anything like Dr. Muhajir, she would be very lucky indeed. Within a few months of the first appearance of the Catholic priest, 2 special cargo ships brought building materials for a church, a school, and a clinic. Chamat gladly sold them a choice piece of land on top of the highest hill in Muarasiberut and informed us regularly about the progress of the construction work. Although I was ready to drop Chamat's name from our list of friends, Rahmat continued his friendship with him and scolded me for not having enough faith and for thinking that a few priests could hinder the progress of the faith of Baha'u'llah. As the people of Muarasiberut were Muslims, the work of building the church had to be done by the Mentawais. These natives were the real focus of the missionaries' attention, and they began their attempts at conversion by offering clothing and other gifts so that the natives would participate in weekly mass. As construction of the church neared completion, 2 special motorboats arrived for the priests to use on their journeys to the villages. The Baha'is were the first target. In addition to the motorboats, they also received monthly deliveries of canned foods and other supplies for the 4 priests and 2 nuns who were managing the affairs of the mission. I never visited the church, but regular reports were given to me by Njonja Wali Negri and others about the wealth and splendor of the priests and their residents. We continued living in our humble room, and Rahmat continued to travel on foot and by canoe. After a month, the priest at the head of the mission, an Italian sent from Rome, visited us and informed us in perfect Indonesian that he was a threat to the Baha'i faith. Saja Bahaja untuk Baha'i. This did not disturb Rahmat at all. He asked the priest about his methods of teaching, offered help in their medical needs, and wished him well. Rahmat's hospitality encouraged the priest to visit us more often. His main purpose was to guide me to the right path, as he believed that I, being so young, was only following my husband's religion because I had no choice. The priest's visit became a source of comic entertainment for Rahmat, and he encouraged me not to rebuff him. He often sat in on the Bible lessons that the priest imposed on me and believed that these lessons would be of great benefit to me in teaching Christians. I was, however, growing angrier with each encounter and took advantage of one of Rahmat's absences to tell the priest in no uncertain terms that I was a fourth-generation Baha'i and had no intention of converting to Catholicism. The priest's only consolation was that as I professed great love for Christ, he might one day guide me aright. From that time, he ceased his weekly missions of mercy to our house, despite Rahmat's repeated invitations. The priests stepped up their visits to Baha'i villages, hoping to convert the Baha'is, who, since they were now aware of the existence of God, were easier to teach. Some of the Baha'is gave in to the temptations of clothing and cigarettes and left the faith. Amata Sinanga sent urgent messages to Rahmat to visit Sipai Pajet. This was the time that I felt I had to pray for the removal of this danger. I thought that the only way was for me to say all the prayers I knew, plus the Tablet of Ahmed for 40 days, and beg Baha'u'llah to free us from this hardship. 12 days later, the priest houseboy came to our place very late at night to ask for Rahmat's help. The head priest was desperately ill with typhoid. The ministrations of the nuns who gave him aspirin and fried bananas had brought him to the verge of death. Rahmat was in Sipai Pajet, and it took him about a week to bring him back by motorboat. For nearly 6 weeks after he came back, Rahmat visited the priest every day, sitting by his bedside, monitoring his fever and supervising his medication. All this time, I had to make soup for the priest from my precious chickens. Rahmat pointed out that since the poor priest's illness was due to my hostile prayers, I had better compensate for it. Now, news of the priest's illness and near demise prompted the Vatican to recall him to Rome. A special boat was sent for him, and as soon as Rahmat permitted, he was taken away. Before leaving, he sent us a note containing 40, it's money from that country, and said, I hope you will accept this moderate fee. I have never seen the love and kindness you showed me, even from my parents. I'm truly sorry for any trouble I might have caused you, and I hope that you will forgive me. Rahmat returned the money and told the priest that he had no hard feelings towards him and was sorry to see him leave. On the day of his departure, the priest visited us for the last time. He brought with him 4 white geese, which he begged me to accept as a gift. He said he was sure that the minute he left, the geese would be butchered by the other priest, and he simply could not tolerate the thought. He embraced Rahmat and assured him that he would never again oppose the Baha'i faith. The priest left and the geese multiplied. When we left the islands, we gave a pair of each to each of the Baha'i villages. On his last visit to the Mentawai Islands, Rahmat saw flocks of geese running in the villages. The 3 junior priests did not have the zeal or drive of their leader. They left the Baha'is alone and tried to have a good relationship with us. They often caused inadvertent offense to the local population, and Rahmat had to intervene to calm things down. Once, when a cow which had strayed onto church land was wounded by a machete thrown by a gatekeeper, there was a riot in the village. Providentially, Rahmat was at home and was able to prevent a mob attack on the church. After this incident, the priests seldom ventured into the village. They tried to show their appreciation by sending us a box full of canned foods. The BO, the boat, was some months overdue, and they were aware that everyone was short of provisions. Rahmat was away, and although our food stocks were very low, I felt duty-bound to return their gift. It was a matter of honor. 2 days later, the shout of Kapal Tiba woke the whole village. At midnight, at the knock of our door, I went to receive the mail, and to my great astonishment, saw Mr. Rustam Peyman standing outside. That's the man they had met when they arrived in Indonesia. I was so delighted and surprised that I dropped the candle I had to grope about in the dark to search for a match. Rustam was a young cousin of Khodaram Peyman who had decided to visit us for a few weeks. When the first hours of happy conversation about the outside world had passed, Rustam realized that if he stayed, it would not be for a few weeks, might be months before he could be able to leave again. This jolted him back to reality. Dawn had arrived and he could see the state of the room and the village. He decided that he had shown enough kindness and started to get ready to leave on the same boat. Only my appeals that he should wait for Rahmat's return persuaded him to stay. Rastam stayed on the Mentawai Islands for nearly a year. He visited native villages, at first accompanied by Rahmat, and later on his own, and was instrumental in bringing hundreds of Mentawais under the banner of Baha'u'llah. He suffered many of hardship, including a bout of typhoid, and left the islands with great regret, only when his business affairs demanded. During this year, although it was not a goal of the 10-year crusade, Rahmat purchased a few acres of land in the name of the faith on a beautiful hilly spot. For the first time in the history of the islands, the deed was sent to Padang and registered. The Guardian announced this achievement in his message of April 1956. Nor should mention be omitted in this brief survey of Baha'i victories and achievements in the course of the closing year of the second phase of the 10-year plan, of the purchase in an island near Muara Siberut, Mentawai Islands, of a plot supplementing the Baha'i endowment established in Jakarta, Indonesian capital. The beloved Guardian's encouragement continued in his talks with the pilgrims. He often mentioned the Mentawai Islands and Rahmat's service to the faith. Once he had likened Rahmat to Hando the Coast Banani and called him a true pioneer. Rahmat was living up to his family name, Muhajir, which means pioneer. So, now, are you all with me? Am I losing you?
We're here.
Are you happy with this?
We're here. We're here.
Thank you. Thank you. Awesome.
Can I continue?
Please do.
Yes.
We have to go through their life. I'm sorry, but this is, we have to go step by step.
That we're
Rahmat-
there. We're in the Mentawai Islands for sure.
You better be and visualize it
I
very
can feel the snakes falling on my head.
You may have to go there one of these days, Sudabe and Fariba too. Rahmat's activities intensified throughout 1956. The schools had started functioning and needed constant supervision. Rahmat was away for much longer periods, and I had to fill the days as best as I could. I had already mastered Indonesian, which is kind of amazing to me, and now decided to learn English, memorizing words from the only dictionary we had brought with us. In the middle of that year, we received 3 messages from the Guardian, all in the same batch of mail. They had been written by Dr. Hakim to my father. These energizing words sustained us for many months. Now, February 5th, March 15th, May 18th, 3 messages in the Guardian appreciate the service of Dr. Muhajir and his wife. He's a true pioneer. He prays for them both to become more successful each day. The second one, assure them of the Guardian, remembers them all the time and prays for them. And a month later, the Guardian's appreciation of Dr. Muhajir, who's a true pioneer, and also his wife. So he's not just a pioneer, but a true pioneer. The Mentawais, like this so poor here, I cannot see. The Mentawais, Baha'is, were now very much at ease with Rahmat, and our one-roomed abode was of great interest to them. Another of the rooms in the building had been cleaned and wallpapered with newsprint for Rustam, and this clearly gave the house greater prestige in the eyes of natives. Those who were familiar with the surroundings brought their friends on a tour, and despite my objections, Rahmat never stopped them. On one occasion, I was sleeping on the wooden bed, recovering from an attack of malaria, when I was awakened by one of the Baha'is showing a friend our belongings with casual informality. He pointed out silotoros, chairs, table, bed, suitcases, and in passing, pointed to me and said, "And that is his wife." My screams brought Rahmat to the room. Doubled up with laughter, he persuaded the touring party to leave. He considered the natives innocent children and saw nothing unpleasant in the behavior. Although our room had a door which was nearly always left ajar, the Baha'is would often enter the room by jumping through the open window. Sometimes I would ask them to jump back out and come through the door. Rahmat considered this an unnecessary discipline, as the Mentawais had no doors and windows in their homes and did not distinguish between them. However, to humor me, he would ask them to do as I wanted. They usually jumped out with great laughter and shouts of amusement. When the Baha'is came to our house, it was usually for deepening session with Rahmat. Can you believe now that they speak Indonesian? He spent hours patiently explaining the history and teachings of the faith with simple stories and examples. He taught them their prayers, repeating each sentence many times so they could memorize them. At fixed intervals, he would offer them bananas and allow them to have their cigarettes. Both lunch and dinner consisted of sago and fish, which they cooked in a large pot over a wood fire in front of our house. Rahmat always shared his meals, joking and laughing as one of them. Such sessions were the foundation of the Baha'i Institutes, which were later established all over Indonesia with great success. Always before they left, I would hand them a broom and ask them to sweep up the cigarette and that had fallen on the floor. They did it with good humor, but told their friends, "Si que lebay magulu," his wife is bad-tempered, because she asked him to sweep the floor. As I look back on those days, I realized how much Rahmat was able to accomplish purely through his intuition. He had no experience in mass teaching, yet became a champion in that field. His blueprints for success were the instructions of the guardian, and who had asked for entry by troops among the brown race, and it was our duty to accomplish it. There were no committees, no minutes of meetings, no picture books, no prescribed methods. He went to the people, told them about Baha'u'llah, and if they agreed with what he said, he considered them Baha'is. He would visit the same village over and over and deepen the new Baha'is one at a time. When they, hold on a second. Excuse me 1 second. Excuse me, I can't do this. Excuse me. You're both talking, you're interrupting me, okay? Just to tell Mama, close the kitchen door, please. I can't work with it. Sorry. I was getting. Please. Okay, sorry. So, no experience of mass teaching, no committees, no minutes. He went to the people, told them about Baha'u'llah, and if they agreed with what he said, he considered them Baha'is. He would visit the same village over and over and deepen the new Baha'is, one word at a time. When they visited us, he welcomed them with open arms, offered them hospitality, and shared whatever was available as a meal. All Mentawais, whether Baha'is or not, were all like his children, and he loved them all. This love was the magnet that attracted the natives first to him, and eventually to the faith. He did not demand anything of them, and if they learned a few words of prayer over a period of 6 months, he was happy. So, we're going to continue reading, but when we think of the Western world today, all Europe and America and all these places, and you look back at those places, whether it's in Africa or South America, the tribes, India, wherever, Asia. It's different worlds in terms of how one approaches teaching, how you are able to really bring in the masses. It's kind of hard to conceive how you would get in any part of Europe or North America or Australia to get a whole group of 30 people to become Baha'is at once. It's impossible, So you sort of wonder, is this just because they are, not part of this civilization. They don't have all these material goods. They have, nothing. Just they live on the land and they have very little, or they haven't been tarnished by the excess of wealth and materialism and all that. Anyway, remember that they left Iran, okay, which is a great civilization, and they left. And this happened mostly Iran and America. The people just left their country to pioneer, and you see many Persians left to go to Africa and to go to Asia and to go to Europe. Many left, some left alone, and many left as couples with children. So they've rendered great services to the Baha'i world. Although he later refined these methods to suit different nationalities, his basic concept remained the same. Mass teaching among indigenous people was effective when conducted in a simple and direct manner, with repeated visits to the same village so that all the villagers became Baha'is. As Rahmat's efforts in the field of social and health development began to produce results, the governor of Sumatra made an unannounced trip to the islands. He arrived in a special boat accompanied by an entourage of nearly 30 ministers and bureaucrats. We thought it was an early arrival of the bureau and were waiting for the mail when Chamat knocked on the door, breathless and trembling, to inform us that the governor was asking for us. The governor's first question was, "What is Allah Abha?" He had been greeted with this phrase by all the natives, and when they were asked what it meant, it was referred to Silotoro. This resulted in lengthy discussions about the faith. The governor became a good friend and remained so for the remainder of his term of office. The governor's biggest surprise was that a young white woman had actually been able to survive in Tawai. As a reward, he announced his decision to build a new house for us and hospital for Rahmat. To my great regret, Rahmat recommended that his task be entrusted to Chamat. It was as if he had discovered a gold mine and was in no hurry to finish the work. It took more than a year before we were able to move to the new building, which was made according to his instructions. It was now 4 years since our arrival in Mentawai. The number of Baha'is had grown to nearly 7,000, and we had 5 Baha'i schools. It was also in this year that Rahmat nearly lost his life on a trip to see Pai Pajet. Torrential rains had swollen the river and the canoe had overturned. Rahmat had tried to swim to the shore against the onrushing waters, but had finally given up. As he was drowning, a tree trunk hit him in the back, and clinging to it, he finally reached the side. His 4 Mentawai companions were also safe and had been looking for him all along the bank. They continued on foot, reaching the village 2 days later. For many months, the natives related this incident and considered themselves lucky that their Silotoro had not drowned. The effect of Rahmat's work was quite evident by now. The Mentawais had become self-assured and confident that they were not inferior to the Sumatrans. The children attending the Baha'i schools knew prayers, and as they chanted them, their parents learned and repeated them in their homes. Rahmat's regular visits to the villages had resulted in better standards of health, cleanliness, and education for the entire population. Mentawai Baha'is were quite distinct from the other people in the islands. Men kept their hair short and clean. Women wore clean clothes and had wild orchids in their hair. Many adults, as well as their children, were literate and could hold their own with the expatriates, many of whom could neither read or write. Lice and fleas had lessened considerably, and soap had become a regular item in villages. On the Guardian's instructions, the Southeast Asian Regional Conference was held in Jakarta on October 26, 1956. With Hand of the Cause of God, Mr. Alai participating, although Rahmat was very reluctant to leave the islands. We attended the conference accompanied by 12 of the Mentawai Baha'is. Amata Sinanga, our first Baha'i, gave a brilliant speech in one of the sessions. I can still see Rahmat's face beaming with pleasure like a father listening to the valedictory address of his child. The regional convention, Southeast Asia, was held in Jakarta in April 1957. My father, Hand of the Cause of God, Musufurutan, represented the house of the beloved guardian. Again, the friends from the Mentawai Islands were the shining stars of this gathering. Completely unaware of that they were the focus of attention, they humbly and happily attended the meetings, said prayers, prepared their own food in the garden, the Baha'i Center, just as they did in their own villages, and offered to share it with the rest of us. The Mentawai Baha'is were later among those indigenous believers represented in the Baha'i World Congress, the Most Great Jubilee in London in 1963. Anyway, just skipping ahead now. So Rahmat was elected to the Regional Spiritual Assembly. He did not feel happy about this at all, since it meant that he would have to leave the Mentawai Islands every so often to attend the meetings. However, he did not resign. But submitted to the will of the majority, as well as his manner. The Regional Assembly made Rahmat responsible for purchasing a temple site in Jakarta. We left for that city in September 1957. Rahmat immediately embarked on a search for a suitable property, and whenever he had free time, went to the surrounding towns and villages to teach the faith. We were still in Jakarta in the first week of October when a letter arrived from the hands of the Cause of God for Asia, appointing Rahmat to the auxiliary board. He had been offered this position several times but had declined, as he did not want to leave the Mentawai Islands even for short periods of time. He was on one of his teaching trips to the villages, still wondering how to decline this appointment. Once again, when a cable was received from the National Assembly of Iran, relaying the telegram of the beloved guardian, elevating him to the rank of hand to the cause of God. The cable read, Rawhani Care Khadem, Tehran. Inform Rahmatullah. Inform Rahmatullah, Muhajir. Abu Qasim Faizi. Their elevation, rank, hand, cause, confident, new honor will enhance the record. Their historic services. Stop. He was 34 years old. It took me 2 days to locate Rahmat and convey to him the cable's contents. He came back to Jakarta immediately. His first reaction was absolute perplexity. He shut himself in a room for hours and wept constantly. It took 2 days of continuous prayer before he could emerge, pale and wan, to cable his obedience to the beloved guardian. The Baha'is of Jakarta urged him to remain in the city to meet the friends, but he just wanted to go home. Although he was aware that he now had other more pressing duties, he wanted to return to his pioneering post to meditate and await the guardian's instructions. On arrival in Padang, we were informed that the Bio had engine trouble again and that it would be a month before we could leave for Siberut. A week passed before we heard that the fishing sampan was leaving for the Mentawai Islands and that we could go with it if we wanted. So we were on board for less than 5 hours when a severe storm hit the boat. So as not to endanger the lives of a foreign doctor and his wife, the fishermen decided to return to Padang. After another few frightening hours, we put ashore. On arrival at the hotel, we were told that there had been a frantic phone calls from Jakarta. The Baha'is had left urgent messages that we contacted them. The date was November 5th, 1957. Many Baha'is around the world remember the exact moment that they heard the horrifying news of the passing of the beloved of Allah. Our hearts, I can vividly see the small office of the hotel manager and Rahmat's ashen face as he listened on the phone, moaning in disbelief. He asked me to talk to the secretary of the regional assembly to ascertain if he had heard him correctly. To our great distress, we were told that they had received a cable from the Holy Land regarding the ascension of the guardian of the Upper Kingdom. Rahmat was asked to leave immediately for London. We spent that night in prayer and torment. We had suddenly lost the core of our existence. We were paralyzed. Our beloved guardian, for whom we were willing to give our lives, was gone. The sign of God on earth, our only refuge, whose love and care has sustained us through all the hardships of the past 5 years, was not with us anymore. We felt lost and aimless. There seemed no reason to go back to the Mentawai Island, or for that matter, to do anything else. Rahmat, however, had to leave for the funeral, and we had to find a way for him to get to London. We drew on our friendship with the governor to find seats on the plane to Jakarta, and the next day, Rahmat was on his way. That day changed Rahmat's life and manner forever. That day changed Rahmat's life and manner forever. His overflowing humor gave way to a quiet gentleness. The smile, so well remembered by his friends, was now accompanied by deep sadness in the eyes. His exuberant optimism was gone, gave way to contemplative hope. The spontaneous moments of joyful banter, which had been a great source of relief in our often stressful years in the Mentawai Islands, was gone forever. The passing of the guardian had transformed him into another personality. To the outside world, he appeared calm and relaxed, but inwardly, he never overcame. Never overcame. The sadness of the loss of his guardian. Rahmat's sense of humor and joy of life had been my salvation and had enabled me to deal with every hardship. I remember one occasion where a particularly severe bout of malaria had made me so weak that I thought I would not survive. His funny stories and jokes kept me occupied for hours while he fed me soup he had made. Often, when I felt homesick, he would sing Persian songs, accompanying himself on a tin box. He told me that if we were in Iran, I would be listening to the radio, to singers who did not have as good a voice as he. The spectacle of his pounding on the rusty tin box in a room with no furniture or light, rain and water dripping from the ceiling and the walls, was so funny that we would laugh and I would forget my sadness. Although he loved music, he never sang again. And the only occasions in which we heard his melodious voice was when he chanted prayers. To the end of his life, we're talking about 20 years now from that day on, to the end of his life, whenever he chanted one of the Guardian's prayers, tears poured down his eyes. Despite this great sense of loss and grief, his only thought was to return to the Mentawai Islands and continue the work that had passed please the Guardian. After participating in the first conclave of the Hands of the Court in the Holy Land, he was asked to visit Iran for a few weeks and explain to the friends about the end of the guardianship and the start of a new era in the faith of Allah. He told me that when the friends were asking about another guardian, they thought that it would be the same person. They wanted the guardian to come back. However, he believed that after some time they would realize that the beloved guardian could not come back, could not return, and they would settle down to carry out Sheikh Effendi's wishes and instructions. With the exception of a few rare cases, Rahmat's prediction was proven right. He went back to the Mentawai Island, repeated letters from the Hands of the Coast in the Holy Land suggesting that Rahmat reside in a more accessible city, did not persuade him to leave. The Intercontinental Conference for Asia, planned by the Guardian, was to be held in Jakarta in September 1958. We were asked to help in the preliminary preparations for the conference, and leaving the islands for Jakarta during July. Work progressed smoothly, permits were issued by the government for this conference, and the venue, a large and beautiful hall, was booked. Rahmat warned all of us on the organizing committee against excessive publicity. The conference was for the Baha'is, not for proclamation of the faith in a country which had just awakened to Muslim fundamentalism. Although freedom of religion was one of the articles of the Indonesian constitution and the faith had been officially recognized as an independent religion, Rahmat felt that it was not the time for widespread publicity. Rahmat was engaged on a teaching trip when a member of the regional assembly and another Baha'i who was a professional media consultant arrived in Jakarta. Pleas for caution and of the imminent arrival of hundreds of Baha'is was headlined. Pleas for caution were rejected and the media blitz started. News of the conference and of the imminent arrival of hundreds of Baha'is was headlined in all major newspapers. Contacts and interviews with government ministers were arranged, and many people of high office were invited to attend the public meeting during the course of the conference. It was only a matter of days before the storm broke. The permit for the conference was revoked, and no amount of contact with the friends of the faith could persuade the government officials to reverse their decision. Rahmat was hastily recalled to Jakarta, and he immediately put a stop to the publicity activities of the two friends. Although he and Mr. Paiman tried through the personal contacts to obtain another permit for the conference, they did not succeed. Rahmat did not reprimand anybody. Can you get some papers? Rahmat did not reprimand anybody. In all the years of his service, he never blamed others, even in private, even when something went wrong. His philosophy was that dwelling over the past was useless, and he tried to find remedies for whatever had happened. He always said that Baha'u'llah was most forgiving, and he did not watch his followers all the time to find faults with them. On this occasion, however, when he was told by the two gentlemen that he was too cautious and did not realize the value of publicity, he firmly told them not to interfere anymore and assured everyone that this was the will of God and that someday we would realize the significance. The Hands of the Cause of God, Samandari, Alai, Featherstone, and Iowas, was to represent the Holy Land at this conference, were now in Jakarta. They decided that rather than make further efforts to save the situation, the conference should be moved to Singapore. Though this achieved great publicity among the Chinese population of Singapore, with positive results, the cancellation of the conference in Jakarta was the start of severe repression of the faith in Indonesia, which led eventually for the faith being banned. The incident made it clear to Rahmat that he had to be accessible in case of emergency, His duty as a hand of the cause of God outweighed his work as a pioneer. He had been entrusted with the protection and propagation of the faith throughout the whole region. Now he had to think of leaving the beloved friends of the Mentawai Islands. We had lived on those islands for nearly 5 years. It was our home, and these people were our friends and family. Rahmat was offered a very profitable job in Jakarta, which he flatly refused. He did not want to live anywhere that had a large number of Baha'is. To the astonishment of the government health authorities, he opted for a small hospital in a town called Pasitan. He returned to the Mentawai Islands, visited the friends in all the villages, and took his leave of them with great sorrow. There were nearly 9,000 Baha'is in 8 schools, which he left to the care of the Baha'i teachers. The clinic in Pasitan had no doctor. Rahmat was the first physician there and stayed there a little under 2 years. Rahmat charged his patients only what they could afford to pay, which was often nothing. Once, when a tribal man who had come some distance asked how much he had to pay, Rahmat asked him how much he could afford. He opened his handkerchief, which contained a few rupees. Rahmat took one and gave him some medicine. He had gone a few yards when Rahmat called his nurse and asked him to run after the man and give him back the money, plus some more which he had added. Despite Rahmat's charity and free treatments, the clinic was still lucrative, as our years on the Mentawai Islands had left us without the habit of spending. The paper rupees remained stacked with a rubber band around them in the drawer of his desk. Before he left Indonesia in 1958, Rahmat contributed most of his earnings for the purchase of a Baha'i center in another island. Rahmat was a good and experienced physician with a gentle and loving manner. He often sat at the bedside of a patient in his white overall and chanted the healing prayer. Although Muslims, the patient swore that his chanting made them feel better. He seldom lost a patient. During all his years of medical practice, his rapport with those who treated went beyond the mere relationship of a physician and patient. People simply gravitated to him, and he liked all of them. While in Siberut, a young man lost his senses and had to be restrained until he could be sent to Padang. He was kept in a cell of the former prison. No one dared even pass the road in front of the room. Just seeing people made him so violent that he could endanger his own life. Food and water were left for him outside the bars on the end of a long bamboo pole. Rahmat, however, would go inside his cell to sit with him and comfort him. I once watched from a safe distance for 15 minutes that Rahmat was with him. The young man was perfectly normally talked and smiled and was very pleasant. When Rahmat stood up to leave, he begged him to stay longer and tried to kiss his hand. Rahmat had to promise that he would return or else he would not allow him to leave. The moment Rahmat left his cell, the man's screams began again. Rahmat shrugged this off and said that the young man felt an affinity with him because he was just as crazy. The truth was that the rest of us did not show so much compassion as Rahmat to his unfortunate young man. In 1960, a delegation of Indonesian government officials and lecturers from the University of Padang visited Mentawai. In their 115-page report entitled Research News, Mir Silombing, the lecturer, and Mr. Slamet Suradisatra, Dean of the College of Law at the University of Padang, made the following observations. This is part of the report. The Baha'i religion started to spread in Siberut in the year 1955. This religion has its root in Iran, and its promoter came from a very prominent and rich family. His name was Baha'u'llah. The teachers of this religion are mostly educated people who are Persians and teach their faith wherever they are. Almost in every corner of the world, there are followers of Baha'u'llah who are called Baha'is, although they are not many in number. Since the Baha'is are rich people, periodically the leaders organize conferences in different countries of the world. These conferences are vitally important as the reports of the progress of different activities in the world are given. The progress of the Baha'i religion in Siberut can be explained as follows. In the year 1955, a Persian doctor came to Siberut. His name was Muhajir. Rahmatullah, a government doctor who assisted and worked for the health of the people. At the same time, he was very active in spreading the Baha'i teaching, Baha'i faith. He went to different villages, deep into the island, going through very difficult and dangerous circumstances, facing death. He distributed medicines and other things for free. This work brought in great results. In short time, many Baha'is were registered. Until now, in Siberut, Selatan, 2,500 followers exist and the numbers are increasing. The Baha'i way of teaching is very special, unique, and interesting. To attract the heart of the people, they have much more patience than the other missionaries who were present in Mentawai. They meet in the houses of the people, drink and eat with them, and live months and months in the middle of the jungle with the people. In short, there is no movement that can compare itself with the Baha'is in Siberut, especially in their courage, perseverance, purity, and motive. The restrictions on the faith in Indonesia increased and finally reached the point when the Baha'is were being deliberately persecuted. The Baha'is of the Mentawai Islands were subjected to imprisonment and beatings. The authorities sought to compel them to recant their faith. Some succumbed, many more refused to give up their beliefs. Some had been in prison for years. Rahmat returned in 1964 to assist the NSA determine the appropriate response to this development. He went to Padang to ask the governor to intercede, and through his friendship with government officials, helped lessen the persecutions of the Mentawai Baha'is to a great degree. Through these difficult times, the Baha'i children of the Mentawai Islands continued to study in the Baha'i schools, which numbered 20 by this time. On a visit to Indonesia in 1970, Rahmat suggested the establishment of a Baha'i asrama, which is a boarding school for the Mentawai children. The faith had been officially banned in 1962, and Rahmat did not want the persecution coupled with increased activities of the church to cause the children to drift away. This proposal was approved by the House of Justice, and the small house was rented in Padang. Dr. and Mrs. Astani, longtime pioneers, took over the duty of visits to the Mentawai Islands and helped with the establishment of the asrama. Rahmat asked Manushehr Tasmabian, a young man who wanted to pioneer to Thailand, to go to Padang and help. Mrs. Ismat Bahdat, longtime pioneer in Indonesia, who had visited us in Mentawai Islands for a few months and had come to love the natives, volunteered their services as manager of asrama. Manushehr visited Siberut, the other islands of Mentawai, many times, accompanied by Surip Sukiman, one of the Javanese teachers, and brought some of the children with him to Padang. Another Baha'i, Pa Karim, who had been sent to the Mentawai Islands as a vaccinator, was also assisted in this venture. He was a staunch Muslim, but accepted the faith through Rahmat and had Baha'i tattooed in his arm, on his arm. The children of the asrama, now about 20 in number, were all able to attend high school, and some have graduated from university. Many of their parents still remember the gentle and kind man who they called Silotoro, who sat on the damp and dirty ground teaching the alphabet by drawing letters in the shapes of different birds and animals. They also remember him holding their children on his knee and teaching the prayers. Rahmat was able to visit the Mentawai Islands on 2 further occasions. His final visit to Padang was April 1979, the year he passed away. On this trip, he had a dream which made him very happy. Years before, he had asked Handle the called Samandari that if he were to go to the Upper Kingdom first, he should mention his name to the presence of Baha'u'llah. In Padang, he dreamt that Mr. Samandari came to him and said, Rahmat John, I have fulfilled my promise. And that's the end of that chapter of the life of the couple. That was Madame. She had one sentence that summarized what that. She said, he had to go to the conclave and so on. He was not handled because he couldn't stay longer there. She had to go to Iran to be with her parents. And she said, this period, talking about the trip, marked the end of the most cherished period of our life together. The trip they were going to him. In October 96, we left Indonesia for the Holy Land. Rahmat to attend the conclave of the Hands of the Cause. I to visit my parents. This trip marked the end of the most cherished period of our life together, a time which Rahmat looked upon with great nostalgia. Now, that's it for me today. Now, the 20 years that come, they're just too much. It's non-stop teaching across the world. I mean, you get dizzy. But since I want to conclude on the next Zoom or live for Rahmat, I want to just take very few personal notes of things he did, things people said about him, and major messages that he sent to the people concerning especially education of children. And the last few days of his life, I want to conclude that one. I'm going to skip 20 years of Hand of the Cause of God, because it's just, the agenda is so full, you just get dizzy by reading it. You just have to look at the book and see how many countries. I don't think he had time to visit his family. He must have, but I mean, I don't know. It's just non-stop. Non-stop. The same goes for many Hands of the Cause. I remember seeing in a conference in California, Hand of the Cause, William Sears. His eyes were shot red. I mean, they worked so hard and so intensely. They traveled so much and they dealt with so much. I don't think anybody can understand it. But this book explains details because his wife got reports from everybody across the world. People sent her all these messages and all these memories of them. Just there's so much. And just the other day, I found this site. There's so many sites in this world now, Baha'i sites, devoted to the Hands of the Cause of God. So I mean, there's people that I don't go to anything. I just go to this Zoom here, and I have we are like 9, 10, 12, 15 Baha'is that we love and we stay with them. So, but if you want to really get to know and follow stories of the Hands of the Cause, that site probably has so much, but the kinds of things I'm looking at is some details in the lives of some people, hoping that somebody is touched by that and we can share other stories and we can get inspired enough to be able to go and do our teaching, because Muhajir, the Muhajir is Dr. Muhajir. We are our own lives. We've got to do stuff. We have to be inspired, but we have to do stuff. And all of us have done things. You have to continue doing things. Can't stop.